All right, we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Sip&Talkers. No matter what time zone you're in, welcome back to Sip&Talk.
Welcome, welcome. It is time, once again, for your global update on finance, tech, and everything in between.
I am Joe.
And I'm Sunny, here to help you stay on top of the world's pulse.
That's a good line. Are you trying to make that your official catchphrase now?
Hey, I have to. You keep stealing my classic opener. Good morning, good afternoon.
I just wanted to try it on for size. It felt pretty good, I have to admit. So thank you for letting me borrow it.
You're welcome. What can I say? You're my partner in crime.
Speaking of crime, that fire control radar incident between China and Japan feels pretty close to one.
Oh, absolutely. The whole thing just made me think of this crazy scenario. Imagine there's a bully, standing right outside your front door, and he's just wildly swinging a knife around.
Okay.
And you just accidentally step a little too close, and he immediately turns and blames you for almost getting stabbed. I mean, that logic, it's basically the international relations version of victim blaming.
That is a very vivid and, frankly, pretty accurate analogy, because behind that absurdity is a really high-stakes debate over international law, over sovereignty, and I think most importantly, over this fundamental question of who is the danger initiator.
Exactly.
So today on Sip and Talk, we're going to dig deep into that. How this kind of behavior, this putting a knife to your neck and then blaming you for having a neck, how that creates this huge moral hazard for global security.
Yep, we're going to walk you through all the latest in finance, tech, and global news. And then we're going to save that fire control incident for the end. It's our main event.
The grand finale. Today we are asking, playing with fire, who is the provocateur? Let's get started.
Okay, let's do it. First up, the financial world, which feels like it's caught between wanting a huge party and being terrified of the hangover.
A perfect description. So the biggest story really driving the markets this week is all about the Federal Reserve's final interest rate decision of the year. The consensus is, well, it's overwhelmingly for a cut.
A cut, finally.
We're looking at a market expectation of a 25 basis point reduction. That would move the target range down to 3.5 to 3.75%.
And when you look at the probability charts, it's pretty much a done deal. I mean, analysts are hovering somewhere around 87 to 89% certainty.
So investors, traders, anyone with a loan, they've already priced this in.
Right. But the why behind the cut is the real story. And that gets us to what we're calling the Dove's argument, the case for more stimulus.
The rationale is all about prevention. It's seen as a necessary preventative step because we're getting these clear signals that the economy is finally cooling off. I mean, look at the jobs data. Employment growth is slowing down. The unemployment rate has ticked up just a tiny bit. It basically shows that the Fed's aggressive rate hikes, they did their job.
So now it's time to ease off the brake a little.
Exactly. Pivot slightly, inject some liquidity, and try to stop a deep recession from actually happening.
The classic soft landing maneuver. But they really have to thread the needle to make sure the plane lands gently and doesn't just stall out midair.
And this view has some serious heavy hitters behind it. The CFO of SETI came out and said they expect the cut. Even the White House economic advisor, Hassett, suggested the Fed has plenty of room to cut even more.
Wow, so they're basically giving the Fed chair a little nudge, saying, hey, your job's not done, but the priority has shifted from crushing inflation to saving the economy.
And what happens when the market starts to sniff that kind of easing in the air?
Oh, it is a full-on risk-on environment. Lower rates are basically just gas in the tank for the whole system. The mere thought of cheaper money has already sent small-cap stocks, the ones in the Russell 2000 index, to a new record high.
And why the small cap specifically?
Well, because small companies, they tend to rely way more on debt that has variable rates, things like bank loans, more so than, say, a giant multinational. So when the cost of borrowing drops, their potential for profit just shoots up almost immediately. And it also gives a boost to other risk assets, things like Bitcoin, even gold. Investors see capital flowing out of the boring, safe stuff and into things with higher risk, higher reward, all because capital is just cheaper. They're chasing yield.
Okay, but here's where it gets complicated. And this is why just looking at that 25 basis point number is, it's really misleading. We have to talk about the Hawks warning, because this is probably going to be what everyone's calling a hawkish cut.
A hawkish cut. I mean, that sounds like a contradiction in terms, like a politician promising a tax cut while secretly raising all the fees.
That is a perfect analogy for it.
So how does the Fed give the market a gift, but also slap a huge restriction on it at the same time?
That's the catch. The cut itself is almost guaranteed.
Yeah.
But the real story The key is in the dot plot and the forward guidance they release with the decision.
Okay, so for anyone listening who doesn't, live and breathe Fed meetings, break down the dot plot for us. What is that?
So think of it like an anonymous poll for all the bigwigs on the Federal Open Market Committee. It's a chart where each official puts a little dot showing where they personally think the interest rate should be at the end of the next few years.
Got it.
It gives you this great visual of what the committee is thinking, whether they're all on the same page or if there's a lot of disagreement about where rates are headed.
Okay, so the official vote is to cut, but the dots on the chart might signal that they're going to be really cautious in the future, and that's the hawkish cut.
Exactly, because inflation, it's down, but it's not totally gone, especially in sticky areas like services. So you have this group of officials, the hawks, who are still really, really cautious. They'll vote for the cut now, maybe to avoid political heat or a big slowdown, but they'll use those dots to signal very strongly that the pace of cuts next year is going to be way slower than the market wants.
Meaning they might signal, like 1 or 2 cuts in 2026 when the market is pricing in, 4 cuts.
Exactly. And that gap, that difference between what's expected and what's delivered, that's where you get a huge potential for disappointment and, a ton of market volatility.
And we're already seeing some skepticism in the bond market this week, right?
We are. Standard Chartered pointed out that even with the high probability of a cut, the bond market was still acting nervous. The 10-year Treasury yields, which are a good measure of long-term risk and inflation fears, they actually rose a bit this week.
So wait, why the contradiction? The stock market's celebrating, but the bond market's worried. Why?
Because the bond market is always playing the long game. Rising 10-year yields tell you that the smart money believes that high real interest rates, that's rates after you account for inflation, are going to stick around for a lot longer.
So they don't believe the Fed can be as aggressive with cuts as the stock market hopes?
They think the Fed's hands are tied by that underlying inflation.
Okay, so it's like this. The Fed gives you a 25 basis point coupon today, but at the same time, they're telling you could only use 1 coupon every 3 months for the next 2 years.
Yes. It looks good on paper, but your actual ability to borrow freely is still really restricted because everyone's still terrified of inflation coming back.
All right, let's shift from interest rates to the engine that's really driving this bull market. Artificial intelligence.
It is consistently pointed to as the critical factor for any kind of sustained growth. It feels like we're in one of those big, long-term innovation cycles.
Right, the ones that have those distinct stages. There's the construction phase where you build all the infrastructure.
And the return phase where you start making money. And then over-delivery where it just becomes cheap and everywhere.
And right now we are deep in the very, very expensive construction phase.
And that expense has become a geopolitical battlefield. We have to talk about NVIDIA and their exports to China, because U.S. policy here is this incredibly tricky balancing act.
It is. It's a compromise between economic reality and, strategic containment.
It's a real tightrope walk. So the president approved the sale of a slightly, let's say, detuned version of NVIDIA's top chips, like the H200, to China.
And that decision was based on a super complicated and, frankly, a very highly debated assessment inside the White House.
And what was that assessment, basically?
The conclusion they came to was that, a single high-end NVIDIA chip is way better than anything China can make. But the U.S. can't really stop China's collective computing power anymore.
I see.
The fear is that China's domestic tech, specifically Huawei's new chip cluster, the Cloud Matrix 384, can combine a whole bunch of lower-tier chips that, in total, can match the power of one high-end NVIDIA server.
So the strategy is to let U.S. companies sell the slightly less powerful chip, keep the revenue flowing, but hold back the absolute best of the best technology.
Exactly. It's a quantity versus quality fight. The U.S. is limiting the quality of a single chip, but China is innovating by just networking thousands of lower-tier chips together. But this policy has gotten some serious congressional pushback.
Oh, it's been met with fury. You have senators like Ricketts and Coons who are deeply concerned, and they're arguing that selling any advanced chips is just fundamentally dangerous.
And their argument is based on China's history, right?
100%. They point to China's undeniable track record of intellectual property theft. Their whole playbook is to buy the tech, reverse engineer it, build their own domestic industry, and then aggressively push the American companies right out of the market.
So what's their plan to stop it? What's the legislative fix?
They've introduced something called the Safe Chips Act. The whole point of this bill is to legally codify and just dramatically slow down the flow of any advanced AI chips to China.
So it takes the decision out of the president's hands.
That's the goal. It aims to maintain U.S. tech leadership by putting up legal barriers to these exports, making containment an official strategy, not just a trade consideration. They think it's too important to be left to, a presidential decree.
Now, let's pivot from the geopolitics of chips to just the pure economics of it, because we are in the middle of a serious AI cost crisis.
The numbers are just staggering. OpenAI, for example, is reportedly burning through cash at a rate that is faster than the combined total of Tesla, Amazon, and other huge tech giants during their biggest growth spurts.
Wait, think about that for a second. We're talking about companies that built global shipping networks, massive factories, huge data centers.
Right. Physical infrastructure.
And OpenAI, which is mostly a software company, is somehow burning more cash faster. Why? What is costing so much?
It just highlights the almost unimaginable cost of building these frontier AI models. It's not just paying smart people, it's the infrastructure for training them, getting and cleaning these massive, massive data sets, the insane amount of electricity needed to run GPU clusters for months on end.
It's just pure computational power.
Pure, raw power. It really makes you wonder how long that financial model is even sustainable without some kind of massive breakthrough that can be monetized at an equally massive scale.
And the geopolitical angle doesn't start with China. It also hits our own supply chain dependence.
And that brings us to Intel. Intel is trying so hard to get back its global manufacturing crown, but they're being held back by their struggles with their most advanced process, their 18A process.
What does 18A even mean?
It's the size of the components on the chip, measured in angstroms, which is even smaller than a nanometer. It's the absolute cutting edge, and Intel is struggling to get good yields.
Meaning the number of usable chips they get from each production wafer.
Exactly. Their ability to make these tiny, powerful chips at scale is still limited. And because of that, they're still relying on excess capacity from TSMC to supplement their own factories.
And there's the irony. The U.S. government wants to control advanced manufacturing and decouple from China, but its biggest domestic chip maker is still heavily dependent on capacity from TSMC in Taiwan, a major geopolitical hotspot, to make its most advanced products.
It just reinforces every single day how critical Taiwan is to the entire global tech ecosystem.
Okay, let's shift gears and follow the money. Because right now, massive amounts of capital are moving away from the public stock market and into the, let's say, shadows of the private market.
It's a revolution in how companies are being built and financed.
The growth of alternatives is just mind-blowing. It really signals a fundamental change in finance.
Yeah.
JP Morgan is projecting that the global alternative asset market, we're talking private equity, private credit, all that stuff, is going to grow from $20 trillion today to an incredible $30 trillion.
30 trillion.
They see massive opportunities there because the public markets just aren't cutting it for long-term growth anymore.
And that growth is tied directly to this trend of companies staying private for longer.
So much longer.
They are actively trying to avoid the pressure of quarterly earnings reports, those aggressive activist investors, and just the immense regulatory burden of being a public company. The average time for a company to go from its founding to an IPO is now about 14 years.
14 years? I mean, that's up from, 5 years back in 1999?
Right.
During the dot-com boom, everyone rushed to go public to cash out. Now they're rushing to stay private to build massive value away from all the Wall Street noise.
And this trend is leading to the potential for these multi-trillion-dollar private companies. They're calling them kilocorns, since a kilo is 1,000, or my personal favorite, dragons.
Dragons. I love
They are becoming market-dominant giants completely off the public books.
And the poster child for this whole strategy has to be SpaceX. They're the definition of the stay private longer model.
Absolutely.
They're now planning an IPO for 2026. Maybe it slips to 2027, but the valuation they're targeting is it's unbelievable, $1.5 trillion.
The scale is immense. And the reason for the IPO is just as big. They want to raise over $30 billion in that offering.
$30 billion.
And it's all earmarked for their most expensive, most ambitious project yet, building out their space data centers, which is basically their Starlink satellite constellation.
It just shows that even a company worth $1 trillion+ still needs public money for those huge, game-changing infrastructure projects.
And beyond the high-flying tech stuff,
Yeah.
the other big investment focus in the private markets is infrastructure.
We're seeing huge demand for energy, grid modernization, all the electrification efforts. So private capital is pouring into things like bridges, power plants, 5G towers, stable long-term assets.
Yeah, and the other one is real estate, but very specific parts of it. While all the headlines are about empty office buildings, private equity is buying up industrial logistics centers, cold storage warehouses, and apartment buildings.
Right, because they offer stable income growth even when the market is volatile. It's a hedge against inflation.
Speaking of huge deals, we have to talk about the biggest media battle we have seen in years, the fight over Warner Brothers Discovery.
Ooh, this is a messy one. It's a hostile scenario with some serious political and foreign players involved.
It is a really complex fight. You've got two completely different strategies clashing. On one side, you have Netflix. They are only interested in buying WBD's streaming services and their studio assets. They just want to bolt on more premium content to their platform.
And on the other side, you've got the Paramount Skydance Group. And they want the whole thing, the whole company, including the crown jewels of old media, CNN, TBS, TNT. They want the whole portfolio.
And the financing for that Paramount Skydance bid is absolutely colossal. We're talking a $54 billion bridge loan from banks.
$54 billion.
But the really tricky part is the equity. A $14.7 billion cash injection.
And that's where all the political red flags start popping up. Because the money is backed by Larry Ellison, sure, but the actual cash is coming from these huge Gulf sovereign wealth funds.
Specifically, the Saudi Public Investment Fund and the Qatar Investment Authority, along with Jared Kushner's firm, Affinity Partners.
Which immediately sets off alarm bells in Washington, D.C. I mean, when you have major foreign governments and politically connected people trying to buy a major U.S. news network like CNN.
The concerns about foreign influence over journalism and editorial control just become paramount.
So to try and fix that, the latest proposals have this really strict condition.
Which is?
The foreign entities and politically connected folks, like Kushner, they have to completely give up all governance rights and any seats on the board. It's a clear attempt to build a firewall, to protect CNN's editorial independence from any foreign or domestic political influence, just to get the deal approved.
Okay, let's switch gears to some critical domestic issues. First up, the healthcare cliff.
This is a huge, looming crisis that is going to directly hit millions of Americans. The subsidies from the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, are set to expire soon.
And if Congress doesn't do something, that expiration will trigger this massive, sudden spike in healthcare costs for all the people who rely on those credits to afford their insurance every month.
And of course, the two parties have completely different ideas on how to solve it.
Naturally. The Democrats are pushing for what they call a clean extension.
Which just means renewing the subsidies for a few more years, no strings attached. They just want to maintain that stability and affordability.
The Republicans, on the other hand, are vowing to offer a totally different alternative. They argue that just propping up a flawed system is fiscally irresponsible.
And their proposals are more focused on getting money directly to people, right? Not just to the insurance companies.
A key part of their plan is expanding health savings accounts, HSAs. So for anyone not familiar, these let you save money tax-free for medical expenses if you have a high-deductible plan.
So the Republican idea is to make HSAs bigger and better, encouraging people to pick cheaper plans and be more active shoppers for their own healthcare.
Right. And other ideas include letting insurance companies sell policies across state lines, which they say will increase competition, and also, critically, cracking down on fraud in the system.
So it's a market-based approach versus a subsidy-based approach.
That's a good way to put it. Now, moving from your health to your wallet, let's talk retail. We're seeing a really interesting shift driven by AI and consumer behavior. We're actually in the middle of a surprising offline renaissance.
It's so counterintuitive, isn't it? In the age of Amazon, you'd think brick-and-mortar stores are dead.
But physical retail store traffic has actually grown 6 to 10% recently. It suggests that, people still want that in-person experience. They want to touch things, try them on, talk to a human being.
But even when they're in the store, tech is right there with them. We're seeing this explosion of generative AI in shopping. An incredible 80% of consumers are now using Gen AI tools while they shop.
80%? That adoption rate is insane. What are they using it for?
It's mostly for hyper-rational stuff. Price comparisons, getting personalized product recommendations, and finding out where they can buy something, either online or in a nearby store.
So it's creating this hybrid experience where the physical and digital worlds are just completely merged, even when you're standing in the aisle of a store.
And retailers are definitely catching on. They're using AI to maximize value and, let's be honest, to maximize revenue. They're experimenting with dynamic pricing and price discrimination.
Okay, dynamic pricing I get.
Yeah.
Price changes based on demand, time of day, whatever. But price discrimination, that sounds a little sketchy.
It is a sensitive term, but in this context, it means the AI tries to figure out what you, the individual customer, are willing to pay. If it thinks you're a high-value client who will pay a premium for convenience, the price it shows you might be a little higher than the price it shows someone it identifies as a bargain hunter.
So it's all about maximizing revenue based on each individual customer's willingness to pay.
Exactly. Personalized pricing.
Okay, let's transition now to the big geopolitical flashpoints, starting with the very complex and, frankly, troubling situation in Ukraine.
Yeah, the pressure is really mounting. The latest news is that the U.S. government is putting this intense, almost unprecedented timeline on the peace process.
The president's envoy has reportedly given President Zelensky a really strict deadline, just a matter of days, to respond to a new peace proposal. The stated goal is to get an agreement done before Christmas.
And that speed is raising a lot of concern about what's actually in the proposal. It's widely feared that the terms might heavily favor Russia, potentially forcing Ukraine to give up sovereign territory.
And it seems like the U.S. administration is just really keen to move past this conflict before our own domestic political cycle really heats up.
Oh, the president himself seemed to justify Russia's strong negotiating position. He said, and this is pretty chilling, that Russia is a bigger country and that Ukraine has already lost territory, basically implying that accepting the current battle lines is inevitable.
That rationale completely ignores decades of international law, and it's a very tough pill to swallow for Ukraine's allies. Which brings us to the international pushback.
Right. Slovenia's foreign minister, who is currently representing the UN Security Council president, has been very vocal. She called for an immediate ceasefire, but crucially insisted it had to be a just, lasting peace that is acceptable to Ukraine.
So their position is rooted in principles. They're firmly against changing internationally recognized borders by force, which is the entire basis of Russia's invasion.
Exactly. And they're also demanding strong security guarantees for Ukraine to make sure any peace deal isn't just a tactical pause before the next attack.
And you're hearing that exact sentiment echoed in the U.S. Congress. Senator Ricketts said very clearly that the U.S. has to continue its support until Putin genuinely believes he's losing the war.
His argument is that any deal made under duress is just a temporary surrender. It has to leave Ukraine in a strong enough position to deter any future aggression.
Right. Let's pivot now to the resources that fuel these conflicts, starting with oil.
We've seen some oil price pressure this week. Both Brent and New York crude prices dropped about 1%, which suggests the market is calming down just a little bit.
And that's mostly due to some tangible supply improvements. A big oil field in Iraq came back online, adding capacity. Plus, we've seen an increase in offshore floating storage.
Which means global inventories are high, and that puts a lid on any big price spikes.
And then there's always the big geopolitical lever in the background, the potential softening of sanctions on Russian energy. If a real ceasefire in Ukraine happens, those sanctions could ease, which would flood the market with more supply and push prices down.
Which would be a huge deflationary boost for the entire world.
And while all eyes are on Eastern Europe, we can't forget that geopolitical risk is everywhere. We saw some troubling reports of a regional conflict warning in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, what was that?
There was a reported engagement where Thailand actually deployed F-16 fighter jets into Cambodian airspace over a disputed area.
Wow. That's a critical reminder that even these smaller regional flare-ups can suddenly snarl supply chains and spook investors, especially since Southeast Asia is such a manufacturing and shipping hub.
And that fragility feeds directly into this bigger, more strategic focus on resource security. The U.S. Army is now planning a major domestic initiative because of these dependency risks. What's the plan? They're developing these small, modular domestic refining units. The goal is to guarantee a reliable, internal U.S. supply of critical minerals for military use.
We're talking about things like tungsten for armor-piercing bullets, titanium for jets.
All the rare earths you need for guided missiles. It's a clear strategic move to reduce our dependence on Chinese supply chains, which currently dominate the processing of a lot of these materials.
So it's taking economic security beyond just microchips and applying it to the raw materials you need to fight a war.
Exactly. They don't want to be in a position where they can't fight a long war because a foreign power controls their access to essential minerals.
And finally, let's look at the commodity shock coming from copper.
Oh, this is a big one. Copper prices just hit a staggering record high this week, $11,645 a ton. That's a 30% gain in 1 year.
And this surge is just a perfect storm of supply and demand problems. On the supply side, you've got major disruptions at mines in Chile and Indonesia because of labor disputes and environmental rules.
And at the same time, demand is just soaring, mostly because of the electric vehicle market. EVs use way more copper than a regular gas-powered car.
So this copper shock is another huge signal of persistent inflationary pressure, especially one that's tied directly to the green energy transition.
Okay, now we move to the heart of our discussion today. The high-risk, high-stakes military action that truly defines this question of who is the provocateur.
We're talking about the China-Japan fire control radar incident of December 2025.
This incident is so much more dangerous than a typical headline might suggest. It is an active, calculated act of intimidation.
Let's start with the specifics of what happened. On December 6th, Chinese J-15 fighter jets, which were operating from their aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, used their fire control radar to lock onto Japanese F-15 fighter jets.
And this happened over international waters, southeast of Okinawa, right in the Miyako Strait, which is a critical strategic choke point for getting into the Pacific.
And this was not just a quick blip on the screen. There were two separate instances. The first one lasted for about 3 minutes.
Okay.
The second one, and this is what elevates it from an incident to a full-blown crisis, lasted for an astonishing 30 minutes.
30 minutes under a targeting lock. That is an eternity in a high-speed environment like that.
The Japanese jets had to take evasive maneuvers. Fortunately, both sides kept a safe distance, no shots were fired. But the risk of a catastrophic mistake was just astronomical.
We have to define the danger here, because people hear radar and they think of the weather map. We need to explain the technical meaning of a lock-on. Surveillance radar is one thing. Fire control radar, FCR, is something else entirely.
It's completely different. FCR isn't for general detection. It's highly specialized. It uses this narrow, powerful beam to track a target with extreme precision. Its only job is to calculate the trajectory needed to guide a missile to impact.
So when that radar paints your aircraft, your cockpit just lights up. Your radar warning receiver starts screaming at you. The signal is not, "Hello, we see you."
No, the signal is, you are being tracked by a weapon system.
In military terms, it's the absolute last step before firing a weapon. It transmits the unequivocal signal of hostile intent.
And, while some lawyer in an office might argue it's not a hostile act until the missile is actually in the air, every single pilot is trained to see that lock as the final warning before death.
And that technical distinction means absolutely nothing to the pilot in the moment. The pilot's dilemma is that their training tells them an FCR lock means an attack is coming within seconds.
And in that high-speed, high-G environment, there is zero time to sit there and debate the other guy's intent or wait for your commanders to call you. It demands an immediate defensive reaction.
The human element is terrifying, especially when it goes on for 30 minutes. The historical data shows there's a 30% or higher chance of accidental escalation in these scenarios.
We saw how dangerous this was back in 2013 with the ship lock-on incident and the 2001 mid-air collision. Both of those could have easily started a war.
Which leads us directly to the high risk of miscalculation. The lock-on itself starts this potential spiral. And one huge problem is that there's no immediate, reliable hotline between the Chinese and Japanese military leaders, not to mention the language barriers.
So that gap means that a pilot's required defensive move, like a sharp turn, dropping chaff, could be instantly misinterpreted by the other side as an aggressive move, as preparation for an attack.
Misunderstandings are just amplified into potential tragedy in a split second.
And just look at where this happened. The Miyako Strait. It's not just a choke point. It's critically close to the major U.S. bases in Okinawa, where 50,000 U.S. troops are stationed.
So if an accident happens there, the stakes for U.S. involvement just go up exponentially because of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. It could potentially trigger an Article 5 collective defense scenario.
And on top of all that, this behavior just violates international norms. It goes against the entire spirit of the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea, or CUES, which is an agreement both countries supposedly follow to prevent these exact situations.
Okay, now we get to the philosophical core of this, the debate over who is actually responsible for this risk. And we have two very strong, very different arguments.
Let's call the first one the provocateur view, which goes right back to my aggressor's blame game analogy. The argument here is really simple. China is actively choosing to escalate the situation by using their fire control radar. They are the ones initiating the immediate existential danger.
And analysts, including at places like the Financial Times, they see this as intimidation diplomacy. It's a sophisticated gray zone tactic.
Exactly. It's a way to normalize a military threat to try and change the status quo without ever firing a shot. You're trying to coerce your opponent into changing where they fly and where they operate.
And legally, it's a huge problem. The U.S. and Japan maintain that what they're doing, flying reconnaissance patrols, is totally legitimate under freedom of navigation in international airspace.
It's China's behavior, the act of locking on, that violates all the established safety procedures. They are driving the wrong way down the freeway, causing chaos, and then screaming at all the law-abiding drivers to get out of their way.
Okay, now for the counter-argument. The defender view, which I'll frame as the sovereign defender perspective, China's position is that the lock-on is a necessary countermeasure.
A necessary countermeasure.
They argue it's a direct and proportional response to what they see as U.S. and Japanese close-in surveillance near their coast and their claimed exclusive economic zone. They genuinely view this surveillance as a persistent, intolerable threat to their national security.
Wait a minute. Are you seriously comparing a nation conducting surveillance in international waters, which is a globally accepted practice, with a nation actively locking its weapon systems onto foreign jets? Isn't that a false equivalence?
That's the core of the strategic friction. China argues that while reconnaissance might be standard practice everywhere else, when it happens right on their doorstep, they see it as constant, aggressive harassment.
Okay.
So they frame the FCR lock-on as a non-lethal threat. It's intended to be the strongest possible warning they can give, short of opening fire, to force the other jets to back off and, from their perspective, prevent an actual conflict.
So they believe that if the U.S. and Japan just weren't flying so close, this never would have happened. They're shifting the responsibility for the risk entirely onto the act of surveillance itself.
It's the ultimate chicken and egg cycle of blame.
Mm-hmm.
And that lack of agreement on what is acceptable baseline behavior is what creates the perfect environment for this kind of extreme risk. Which brings us to our final takeaway: moral hazard and risk.
This is where we have to step back and look at the psychology and the political calculations of everyone involved.
The core moral hazard is this: the risk of an accidental war actually goes up because the actors, in this case the Chinese military planners, know that a dangerous action like an FCR lock-on is highly unlikely to immediately start a full-scale war.
Because the stakes of a real war are just too high for everyone.
Right. So they assume the other side will retreat. They'll back down.
And that assumption that the other guy will always blink encourages them to use these extreme high-risk tactics right up to the edge, but not over it. It's like knowing you can speed on a certain stretch of highway because the cops are never there. You push your luck because you think you can get away with it.
So what's the real danger here? The one that keeps military strategists up at night?
The real danger is that this calculated political game turns a complex political dispute into a simple, catastrophic mechanical or human error. All it takes is one young, inexperienced Japanese pilot, under 30 minutes of a screaming radar lock, to make a required defensive maneuver.
A sharp turn, deploying flares.
And that defensive action could be instantly misinterpreted by the Chinese pilot as the start of an attack run. And that rapid-fire sequence of misinterpretations could trigger an accidental shooting war completely outside the control of the political leaders in Beijing or Tokyo.
And that is the ultimate terrifying cost of playing this dangerous game of chicken.
So we wrap this up with one central lesson. A fire control radar lock-on is an incredibly dangerous game for everyone involved, no matter who you think started it.
The only real solution is immediate, consistent de-escalation and a firm agreement to stick to the established international rules of engagement.
And we want to reiterate that our goal here is always to give you an objective, fact-based deep dive. Our discussion is based on analysis, and it's not meant to criticize or discriminate against any nation, government, or group. We really just encourage you to do your own critical, independent thinking on these complex issues.
Absolutely. And a quick note for you, our listener. We talked about some huge investment opportunities today, from that $1.5 trillion SpaceX IPO to big shifts in infrastructure. Please remember, we are expert guides to the news, but we are not licensed financial advisors.
We are simply providing data for discussion. This does not constitute financial advice. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please take a moment to subscribe wherever you get your audio. Your support really helps us keep these conversations coming.
And also be sure to check out our friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got fun memes, amazing travel vlogs, and we've actually started collaborating with his channel on some episode recaps, so you can catch the highlights over there.
We really appreciate you joining us for this crucial discussion.
We'll see you next time.